He said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. She's used to life's leftovers. She won't mind. That was my son. At his wedding. While I sat alone in the back corner, waiting for a cold plate of salmon no one remembered to serve me. This is the story of what I did next. Not to hurt him, but to remind myself I was never meant to live on scraps. Stay with me. Because sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when you're seen, it's when you finally see yourself. My name is Joanne Whitaker, and this is how I stopped waiting to be invited to the table, and set my own place instead. I was sipping my usual cup of instant coffee when I heard the mail slot clatter. I didn't rush to the door. Mail at my age rarely brings surprises. Mostly Bill's grocery coupons and the occasional newsletter from the senior center. But when I bent down to pick up the stack, a thick envelope stood out. Cream-colored, heavier than usual, with gold embossing along the edges. It looked like it belonged in someone else's mailbox. My first thought, retirement insurance brochure. Or maybe another real estate offer to buy my old house for cash. But as I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the card, my breath hitched before I even read it. Mr. and Mrs. Logan Whitaker request the honor of your presence. I stopped reading. My son was getting married, and this was how I found out. No phone call, no dinner conversation. No, Mom, I've met someone. I want you to meet her. Just a pre-printed invitation, sent like a business memo, to my own mailbox. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the envelope still in one hand, the card in the other. For a moment I stared at it as if reading it one more time might rewrite the way it landed in my life. The words were formal, sterile. There was no note, no scribbled message at the bottom. Not even, "Can't wait to see you, Mom." I turned it over, hoping, maybe on the back, nothing. Just the heavy texture of fine paper. Thick, polished, expensive. The kind of thing people spend money on when they want to impress. Not when they want to include. The wedding was in mid-June at some hotel ballroom in Chicago. Black tie optional. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Black tie. That was the kind of world my son belonged to now. Suits with hidden tailoring and champagne towers. I didn't even own a pair of heels that didn't pinch. My kitchen felt suddenly smaller. The linoleum tiles hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner behind the fridge. A pot of soup simmered quietly on the stove, filling the room with the scent of lentils and rosemary. Comforting, but plain. My eyes drifted to the photo frame on the windowsill. Logan at age 5, toothless grin, chocolate on his chin. Halloween 1996. I had stayed up the night before sewing his costume because we couldn't afford the store-bought one he wanted. He never knew. He just smiled for the camera, like I had given him the world. I thought of the other things he never knew. How I gave up my trip to Italy when he got accepted into Northeastern. How I worked 2 jobs the year he needed braces. How I sold my engagement ring, my last tie to his father, to pay for his off-campus housing. He never asked how. He just thanked me and said, "You're the best mom." And I believed him. Now I held this invitation like it was proof of how far we'd drifted. Or maybe how far he'd climbed and how low I'd sunk in his priorities. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he just assumed I knew, or Harper, his fiancée, was handling the invites. But no, my son knew me. Or at least he used to. He knew I cared about things like this. About being asked. About being part of the moment, not just a name on a guest list. That was what hurt most. Not the absence of a phone call, but the absence of consideration. I set the card down next to the electric bill, which was due in 4 days. The gold letters shimmered under the kitchen light, elegant and distant. I stood up, poured what was left of my coffee into the sink, and rinsed the mug. That's what mothers do, right? We keep things clean. We keep things moving. But that night I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't even make dinner. I sat by the window until the sky turned dark and the mailman stopped making his rounds. And I wondered, not angrily, not bitterly, but with a hollow ache. At what point did my place in his life shift from center to afterthought? Maybe it was when he graduated, or when he moved to the city, or maybe it happened gradually quietly, like wallpaper peeling just a little more each year until one day you look up and the whole wall is bare. The card was still on the table. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. But I didn't pin it on the fridge either. I just sat with it, like you sit with grief, not loud, not dramatic, just still. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered if being a good mother had cost me being seen as a person. The next morning, I stood at the sink, rinsing out my coffee mug. The invitation still propped up on the table like an uninvited guest refusing to leave. I'd slept restlessly, waking up twice from dreams I couldn't remember, but left behind the kind of ache you carry in your chest all day. Something about that card, its weight, its formality, had planted itself in the quiet corners of my mind, and I couldn't shake it. I dried my hands and picked up my phone. Logan's contact was still saved as my boy. A label I hadn't touched in over a decade. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. I wasn't sure what I wanted from the call. Comfort, maybe. Reassurance. An explanation. Something human. It rang 3 times before I heard his voice. "Hey, Mom," he answered. Casual. Distracted. I could hear the background noise of keys clacking, maybe a laptop, maybe his fingers drumming on a desk. He didn't sound like someone who had just invited his mother to the biggest day of his life. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to inject warmth into my voice. "I got the invitation yesterday?" "Oh, good," he said. "That was it?" "No." "Did you like it?" "No. Sorry, I didn't call, not even a 'what did you think?' Just good," as if I were confirming a package delivery. There was a pause and I could feel it stretching out like a tightrope. So I did what mothers do. I stepped onto it. "I'm really happy for you, Logan," I said, still smiling even though no one could see. "Harper seems lovely." "Yeah, she is," he said. And I thought I heard a smile in his voice. It was faint, but it was there. For her, not for me. I took a deep breath. I was thinking, if there's anything you need help with, I'd love to lend a hand. Weddings can be so overwhelming. Maybe I could come along to a cake tasting or help with the centerpieces or even just help coordinate. Mom. He cut in a bit sharper now. Not rude, but firm. Decisive. It's all taken care of. "Oh," I said quietly. "Of course. I mean, Harper's parents have been planning everything for months. Her mom's kind of a planner," he added with a laugh, the kind people use when they're not sure if something's charming or controlling. I tried to keep my voice even. I wasn't talking about paying for anything, honey. I just meant being a part of it. You know, maybe helping you choose the boutonnieres or picking a song for the mother-son dance. There was a long silence on the line. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. Not angry, but tired. Like I had asked him to move a piece of furniture that had already been bolted to the floor. "We've already decided on most of that stuff," he said. "And we're trying to keep things streamlined." Streamlined. A word that belonged in a boardroom, not a conversation between a mother and son. Of course, I repeated softer this time. I didn't trust myself to say more. Then, as if to fill the space, he added, "Oh, and just a heads up about the dress code. It's black tie optional, but Harper's family is pretty traditional. So if you could wear something nice, classic, maybe not too conservative." The words came out quickly like he was trying to beat embarrassment to the finish line. Not too conservative. That stung more than I expected. I thought about the navy blue dress hanging in my closet, the one I wore to his college graduation. I had bought it secondhand and taken it in myself because it was 2 sizes too big. It was the nicest thing I owned. I had planned to wear it again. Now I wasn't so sure. "I understand," I said. "I wouldn't want to stand out for the wrong reasons." "It's not about that," he muttered a little too fast. "It's just..." Harper's family is, well, they notice things. They notice things I echoed in my mind. And apparently I was one of those things. He sighed. Anyway, I should go. Harper's making dinner. Of course, I said, I won't keep you. Just wanted to say congratulations. Thanks, Mom. Talk soon. Okay. Okay. But when the line went dead, I knew we wouldn't. Not soon. Maybe not for a while. I set the phone down on the table beside the invitation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there letting the silence settle into the room like a second skin. There was a time, not so long ago, when Logan would have called to ask me how to make his favorite stew or if his suit looked okay, or if a song sounded too cheesy for a wedding dance. There was a time when my opinion mattered. Now it seemed my role was to arrive quietly dressed acceptably and sit wherever they put me. And that was when it hit me. I hadn't been invited to participate. I had been invited to attend. There's a difference, you know. One is about inclusion. The other is about optics. And for the first time, I let that difference sink in. Not as a mother. Not as someone who had sacrificed holidays, hobbies, and whole years of her life. But as a woman who was no longer needed. Only acknowledged. It didn't make me angry. Not yet. But something shifted in me that day. Something important. Not a wound. Not a rage. Just a quiet, certain understanding if I was going to be treated like a guest at my own child's life, then I would start acting like one. And I would decide what I wore, how I showed up. And most importantly, why I showed up at all. I didn't decide to go shopping for a new dress right away. At first I told myself I'd just wear the one from Logan's graduation, the navy blue with the flutter sleeves. It still fit. Mostly. And I'd only worn it twice. But the more I thought about the wedding, the more I realized something had changed. Not in Logan, not in Harper, in me. I wasn't going to that wedding as a mother of the groom. Not really. That role had been outsourced to Harper's parents, delegated with perfect floral centerpieces and a curated guest list. I had been reduced to a seat filler. But if I was going to be in that room, even on the margins, I was going to show up as a woman with dignity. So I started saving. I canceled my streaming subscription. Goodbye reruns of Columbo and Old British Mysteries. I walked to the pharmacy instead of driving. I clipped coupons with a precision I hadn't used since Logan was in elementary school and wanted Lunchables every day. I stopped buying my favorite hazelnut creamer and went back to plain milk. I kept a jar in the pantry marked June and slid small bills into it when I had them. 5 here, 3 there, ones when I could. It became a quiet kind of mission, not desperate, not emotional, just purposeful. By the end of April, I had $164. It wasn't much, but it was enough. On a drizzly Tuesday morning, I took the bus into town and got off 2 stops early. I walked past the discount shops, past the stores where I usually browsed and never bought until I stood in front of a boutique I'd only ever admired through glass. The windows were spotless, the mannequins draped in silk and chiffon like they had places to be. I hesitated before opening the door, suddenly hyper-aware of the scuffs on my shoes and the fraying hem of my coat. But then I remembered I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. The inside smelled faintly of vanilla and expensive candle wax. A young woman in her 20s looked up from behind a sleek wooden counter. "Let me know if you need help," she said with a soft smile, her voice rehearsed and pleasant. I nodded, pretending I belonged. I wandered through the racks slowly, fingers grazing smooth fabrics that whispered wealth and effortlessness. Most were out of my price range. Laughably so. But then near the back, I found it. A sleeveless, champagne-colored gown, simple in shape, but made of fabric that caught the light in a way that felt dignified. It wasn't flashy. It didn't try to be young. It was elegant, understated, like someone who didn't need to be noticed to be remembered. I checked the tag and winced. It was $158. I had just enough. Barely. No room for shoes. No room for anything else. I took it to the fitting room with trembling hands. When I zipped it up and turned to the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked younger or thinner or glamorous. She didn't. But because she looked like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. I bought the dress. The cashier folded it with careful hands and placed it in a tissue-lined bag. I carried it home like a fragile secret. That night I laid it across my bed and just looked at it. It wasn't just fabric, it was proof. Proof that I still mattered. Proof that even if I'd been excluded, I hadn't disappeared. I spent the next week preparing everything else. I didn't buy new shoes. I cleaned my best pair with a toothbrush and a little baking soda. I polished the scuffed heels with a dab of Vaseline and a cotton rag. They looked good enough. Not new, but cared for. I trimmed my own hair in the bathroom mirror, snipping just enough to even out the ends. I used the curling brush I'd kept under the sink for years and coaxed a few soft waves into place. I dabbed on some concealer just under the eyes and a lipstick that still had a label from 2011. It wasn't perfect, but it was me, real, earnest. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the dress. My hands smoothed the bodice, adjusted the earrings I hadn't worn since Logan's college gala. I looked at myself, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't think about what Logan would say. I didn't wonder if he'd notice. I didn't picture him turning to Harper and smiling with pride. Because I knew now, that wasn't coming. This wasn't for him. This was for me. I wasn't walking into that ballroom to be accepted. I was walking in to be seen, not as a mother, not as an accessory, as a woman who had spent decades pouring love into someone and had finally decided to pour a little back into herself. I took a deep breath, grabbed my clutch, and slipped the invitation into it, not because I needed directions, but because it felt like a full circle. The same card that once made me feel invisible was now a reminder that I was still here, still standing, still worthy of walking into any room like I belonged there. Because I did. The hotel was called the Eversage. Just saying it felt like something out of a magazine. Marble columns, glass chandeliers, valets in white gloves. I had washed my car the day before, hoping the shine would hide its age, but pulling into that circular drive in my faded Toyota felt like showing up to a black tie gala wearing house slippers. No one greeted me. No one was waiting with a smile or a wave. Inside the lobby, people buzzed like bees. Beautiful, confident bees in expensive suits and silk gowns. Everyone seemed to know where to go, what to say, who to hug. I stood just inside the door, clutching my clutch like a lifeline waiting for Logan to notice. He didn't. I finally spotted him near the staircase, tuxedo crisp boutonniere perfectly pinned. He was laughing. Shoulders back, head tilted slightly. Talking to a tall man I assumed was Harper's father. His face was bright, animated. The same smile I used to see when he told me about a good grade or when we'd split fries at the drive-thru. I started to step forward. I wanted to say something. Anything. But before I could reach him, Harper turned toward him radiant in white and slipped her hand into his. Logan looked at her. Then he looked past me. And just like that, he turned. My feet stayed planted. My hand dropped to my side. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe... I walked to the check-in table. A young woman in a headset asked my name, found it on the list, and handed me a small folded card with my table number. Table 10, she said, already moving on to the next guest. I followed the signs to the ballroom. The doors were grand, arched and heavy. Inside, everything sparkled glasses, linens people. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Each table was dressed in ivory with gold-rimmed plates and tall floral centerpieces that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I weaved between tables until I found mine. Table 10. It was in the back. The very back. Next to a set of swinging doors that led unmistakably to the kitchen. My place card sat between two empty chairs. Eventually, a woman with a cane and a man with hearing aids shuffled over and introduced themselves. Cousins from Harper's side, I think. There was also a teenage boy on his phone the entire time and a couple who whispered nervously about whether they were underdressed. No one at the table knew my name. No one knew I was the groom's mother. From where I sat, I could barely see the head table. It was on a raised platform draped in soft pinks and golds. Harper and Logan sat in the middle, flanked by her parents, her sisters, and Logan's college friends. Everyone looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. Everyone looked like they were having the time of their lives. I looked down at my hands. They were folded neatly in my lap, resting on the fabric of the dress I'd spent 2 months preparing for. I smoothed the crease just for something to do. A server passed by offering champagne. I took one, though I didn't sip. Bubbles danced quietly in the glass while conversations around me rose and fell like tides I wasn't part of. Eventually, a woman sat beside me, elegant, older, with silver hair in a soft twist. She looked around uncertain and smiled when she saw my face. "Are you Logan's mother?" she asked kindly. "I'm Beatrice, Harper's great-aunt. I don't know a soul here." I nodded, grateful. "Joanne. And no, neither do I." She chuckled. "Well, at least we're in good company." I smiled faintly. She leaned in. "It's beautiful, but this whole affair feels very curated, doesn't it? Like someone tried a little too hard?" I didn't respond. I just looked out at the golden lights, the glittering chandeliers, and the sea of polished people. She wasn't wrong. Everything felt intentional, including where I had been seated. I told myself not to take it personally. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was just logistics. But then I saw the seating chart near the door. At Table 1, the Whitaker family. Table 2, Logan's college friends and their spouses. Table 3, Harper's co-workers. Table 4, Harper's high school friends. And on it went. I wasn't on any list of significance. I was just there. Like the catering staff or the coat check, a formality, a checkbox. I thought of all the birthdays I had planned for him. Pirate-themed, space-themed the year he wanted a magician. I thought of the times I stayed up all night fixing his science fair display or rehemming his choir pants. I thought of the dinners I skipped so he could go on class trips. And now I sat at a table closer to the kitchen than to the groom. And he never once looked back. I wasn't sure if he hadn't seen me, or if he had, and decided that was enough. Either way, I felt like a misplaced object in a room built for display. As the music shifted and the lights dimmed for dinner, I folded my hands again. Not out of politeness, but because it was all I had left to hold on to. And for the first time that night, the question I had been trying to ignore pressed hard against my chest. If this was what being invited looked like, what did being excluded even mean anymore? Dinner service began like a choreographed performance, polished waiters gliding across the ballroom floor with mechanical grace trays balanced expertly in one hand, linen towels folded over the other. From my seat at table 10, I watched as plates were delivered in perfectly timed succession, beginning of course with the head table, where Logan and Harper sat like royalty. Their plates were the first to arrive. Delicate china holding artfully arranged salmon asparagus stalks, golden potatoes swirled like frosting. Servers moved down the tables in descending order of importance like ripples in a pond. First family, then college friends, then Harper's co-workers and distant relatives. By the time they reached our table near the swinging kitchen doors, the music had shifted to something soft and jazzy, and the smell of warm food was starting to fade into the faint antiseptic of industrial cleaning supplies. I tried not to feel out of place. I made small talk with Beatrice, Harper's great-aunt, who had taken the seat beside me. She seemed kind enough, elegant with sharp eyes and a surprisingly dry sense of humor. "I've been to dental appointments more comfortable than this," she whispered at one point, leaning close so only I could hear. I laughed politely. She was trying, and I appreciated that, but beneath her words was something familiar, A shared discomfort. Neither of us quite fit the picture. A few minutes later, a young server arrived. His face flushed. He handed plates to the older couple across from me to Beatrice and to the teenager scrolling through TikTok beside me. Then he paused, frowned, and looked down at his tray. "Oh," he said, I think I'm missing one." He looked up, his voice tight. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. There must have been a mix-up. I'll check with the kitchen and be right back." I smiled and nodded. "No problem." But I felt the eyes. Not cruel, not mocking. Just awkward, like when someone witnesses something mildly embarrassing but doesn't want to say the wrong thing. One of the women across the table offered a sympathetic smile before turning back to her salmon. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Beatrice had nearly finished her meal by the time the waiter returned. This time it was someone new. Older, more experienced, with the kind of weary patience you only earn in hospitality. "Apologies again," he said as he placed the plate in front of me. There was some confusion in the kitchen. The plate looked tired. The salmon was pale and stiff around the edges. The asparagus had collapsed inward like overcooked pasta. The potatoes had that thin skin on top that forms when something sits under a heat lamp for too long. It wasn't just late, it was leftover. Beatrice glanced at it and frowned. "That's unacceptable," she whispered. I shook my head. "It's fine," I said, automatically forcing a tight smile. "I'm just happy to be here." That was a lie. But it was a lie I'd grown comfortable telling over the years. I cut into the fish carefully, trying to ignore how cold it felt against the knife. I took a bite, chewed, and swallowed around the lump in my throat. Somewhere near the front of the room, champagne flutes clinked. Logan stood holding a microphone. His tuxedo looked custom-tailored. Sleek black, crisp white shirt, a boutonniere that matched Harper's bouquet. He looked every bit the grown man I had raised him to become. "Thank you all so much for coming," he began, voice steady and cheerful. "It means the world to Harper and me to be surrounded by so many wonderful people." There was a murmur of applause. He said a few words about love, about timing, about fate, about how perfect Harper was, how lucky he felt. He thanked her parents for their generosity, her sisters for their support, his best man for an unforgettable toast. He didn't mention me, not once. Then, just as he was lowering the mic and turning back to his seat, I heard it. Clear as crystal, careless as a breeze. "They finally brought my mom her plate," he said to someone at the table beside him. His voice was too loud for it to be a whisper, too soft for it to be part of the speech. "She's used to life's leftovers anyway." And then he laughed. Not cruelly, not even loudly. But he laughed. And Harper laughed with him. A few others followed like falling dominoes. Awkward chuckles, nervous smiles, the kind of laugh people give when they don't want to seem uptight. No one said anything. No one looked my way. Beatrice froze mid-sip. "Did he just say—" she began. I didn't let her finish. I set my fork down slowly, gently, as if even the clink of metal might betray me. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I didn't flinch. But something inside me shifted, subtly, irreversibly. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the ease with which it left his mouth, the comfort he felt in diminishing me in front of others, like it was a shared truth, a quirk, a punchline. He saw me as someone who didn't mind being last, someone who accepted scraps, someone who didn't expect more. Because she never had it. And the truth, for a long time I had. I'd taken his late calls, his missed birthdays, his distracted love you twos, and told myself it was enough. Because love is supposed to give right, it's supposed to stretch. But there in that golden-lit ballroom with laughter still echoing faintly from the head table, I understood something I hadn't let myself believe until now. I wasn't loved. I was tolerated, expected to show up, stay quiet, eat what's left, and smile like it was my choice. I looked at the plate in front of me. Cold fish, gray asparagus, stiff potatoes, and thought, this isn't food. This is a message. And I finally read it. After dinner, plates were cleared and glasses refilled. The lights in the ballroom dimmed just slightly, enough to change the air. That's how these moments begin. Not with a sound, but with a shift in atmosphere, like the room collectively holds its breath in anticipation. The band started playing a soft instrumental version of Can't Help Falling in Love, the kind of song that feels both timeless and inevitable. Harper and Logan stood slowly from their chairs at the head table. All eyes turned to them. A spotlight found them effortlessly, as if it had always known where to land. They walked hand in hand to the center of the floor, perfectly timed, perfectly rehearsed. I watched from my seat in the back as they swayed her white dress, moving like water, his hand resting lightly on her waist. They looked like a painting, gorgeous, poised, untouched by anything outside the glow of that chandelier. No one noticed the woman in the champagne-colored gown sitting near the kitchen doors. Her fingers curled gently around a wine glass she hadn't sipped from in an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't smile, either. I simply watched and waited. After their first dance, the music shifted again. Something slower, more sentimental. The MC announced the parent dances, first Harper and her father. He was tall, dignified, with silver at his temples and a proud, steady hand. He twirled her like it was muscle memory, like he'd been practicing since she was born. The crowd clapped, misty-eyed and charmed. People reached for their napkins, dabbing corners of eyes, snapping photos. Then Harper sat down, and the MC's voice rang out again. And now Logan would like to share a special dance with his new mother-in-law. I blinked. Surely he meant me. But no. Logan reached out his hand toward Harper's mother, who blushed, stood, and made her way across the floor to him. They danced slowly. His hand on her back, hers on his shoulder. They laughed at something. He said something into her ear, and she nodded with a proud, maternal smile. I stared at the scene, my face calm, my body frozen. I waited for someone to realize, for someone to say, wait, what about Joanne? No one did. I scanned the room, hoping, just once, for Logan to glance my way, for a flicker of guilt, recognition, a small wave, anything. But he didn't look back. The next song came on. Then another. One by one, couples joined the floor, uncles, cousins, Harper's sisters, and their dates' friends from college. And still I sat. Alone. My hands folded in my lap the same way they had been through dinner, through the toast, through the joke. People passed by our table laughing, heading to the bar or returning from the bathroom. A few gave polite nods. None stopped. I looked at Beatrice. She offered a quiet, tight-lipped smile, the kind you give when words won't fix anything. It was then I remembered something that nearly made me laugh. 3 weeks ago, I'd stood in my living room at sunset, phone in my pocket, Spotify humming softly from my Bluetooth speaker. I had practiced a slow dance, just in case. I had chosen a song, a soft James Taylor track, and placed my hands mid-air as if holding Logan's shoulders. I had pictured his voice whispering, "You ready?" "Mom," I had whispered back. "Always." Now I sat still, while that imaginary moment danced alone in my memory, replaced by the reality of polished shoes sweeping past me, dresses, twirling, laughter rising. The light never touched our corner of the room. It stayed where the love was, where the family was, where I clearly wasn't. I no longer felt misplaced. I felt erased. And the worst part, I knew I would remember every second of this, not because it hurt, but because it clarified. This wasn't about oversight. This wasn't about an overwhelmed couple forgetting to squeeze in another moment. This was deliberate. I was not a part of the picture they wanted to paint. I was there because it would have looked wrong to leave me off the guest list, because it was easier to bury me in a far corner than confront what my presence might represent, a truth too complicated to fit in the curated perfection of a wedding album. So I stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped believing the music might somehow change course. I turned my gaze downward toward the gold-rimmed glass in front of me, now half filled with light more than wine. I thought of the years I spent making sure Logan had what he needed, the birthdays I planned, the science projects, the dentist appointments, the sick days I took without pay. I had danced around his life for decades, making space for his joy, his growth, his independence. And now he had choreographed a new life without me. I didn't blame him anymore, but I also didn't excuse him. For the first time, I saw him not as my son, but as a man who had made a choice, one I would never forget, not because it broke me, but because it woke me. And as I sat in that dim corner, the music swelling the crowd, celebrating, and the night spinning forward without me, I finally understood. I was no longer part of his future. But that didn't mean I couldn't still have one of my own. The front door clicked shut behind me with a soft thud. No one called out. No dog barking. No porch light left on. Just stillness. My heels echoed across the floor as I walked into the kitchen. I didn't bother turning on all the lights. Just the small lamp above the sink casting a quiet golden circle across the table. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like dust. The house felt the same, but I wasn't. I carried myself to the bedroom and slipped out of the gown. The zipper caught slightly, and for a second I considered just tearing it off. But I didn't. I unfastened it carefully, respectfully. That dress, more than anything else that night, had held its dignity. I hung it in the back of the closet behind the unused winter coats and scarves I kept for imagined trips. It still smelled faintly of hairspray and perfume. I closed the door gently, like putting something to rest. In the bathroom, I wiped away my makeup with slow, deliberate strokes. The mirror didn't lie. My eyes looked tired, not just from the late hour, but from years of looking toward someone who had long stopped looking back. Once I'd changed into my softest shirt and a worn pair of jeans, I made a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. It was more ritual than comfort. The steam rose and curled, then disappeared. Quiet and unceremonious like so much else that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop in front of me. For a while, I didn't touch it. I just sat there, fingers laced together, eyes drifting across the tabletop. There were faint scratches on the wood. Marks from Logan's old science projects, the time he built a solar system out of foam balls right here when he was 10. I remembered how proud he was when he painted Saturn's rings. I remembered helping him clean glue off the floor with a warm rag. So many memories lived here. So many pieces of myself. I opened the laptop. The glow of the screen felt harsh against the quiet of the room. I adjusted the brightness, then opened my email. The cursor blinked in a blank message window. I typed his address. Still the same one he'd used since college. I wondered if he'd see my name pop up in his inbox and roll his eyes. Or if he'd even notice at all. For a while I didn't know how to begin. But when I did, the words came steadily. Not from anger. Not from grief, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. I wrote what needed to be said, not to make him feel guilty, not to defend myself, but to state the truth plainly, calmly, and for once. Completely. I told him how I'd heard what he said at the wedding, how I wasn't angry about the words themselves, but about what they revealed. That he had stopped seeing me as a person long before he ever made a joke at my expense. That I had allowed myself to be background noise in his life. Helpful, convenient, invisible. I acknowledged that I had taught him how to treat me. By never saying no. By always showing up. By accepting silence in place of love and crumbs in place of care. But that era was over. In a few sentences, I laid out the changes. No more monthly deposits, no more credit card in his name, no more quiet sacrifices disguised as trust funds. And the house, the one he thought would someday be his. I told him I was putting it on the market. I didn't ask for his thoughts or his approval. I was informing him, because it was mine to inform. I closed the message with a simple truth that this wasn't revenge. This was me choosing to matter. To myself. At 3:47 a.m., I reread the message once. Not to edit, not to doubt. Just to let the weight of it pass through me. Then I clicked send. There was no dramatic pause, no flood of emotion. Just the soft swoosh of an email leaving my outbox. And then the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence I had walked into 2 hours earlier. This one felt earned. I sat for a few minutes longer, letting the quiet stretch across the kitchen like a warm shawl. I looked at the steam rising from my now lukewarm tea and thought oddly that I had been like that for years, giving off warmth slowly fading, never really seen until I was almost gone. I closed the laptop and walked to the living room. I didn't turn on the TV or check my phone. I just looked out the window. The street was still. The porch light across the way flickered slightly. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance and then went quiet. It was a simple night, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone's mother. I didn't feel like someone's placeholder. I felt like someone who had finally stepped off the stage and walked into her own life. And when I climbed into bed just before 4, I didn't rehearse what I would say if Logan called. I didn't imagine him running to apologize or Harper reaching out with regret. I just let the night hold me. And I slept, not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. The first email came before sunrise. I was standing at the sink rinsing out my tea mug when the notification popped up on my laptop. From Logan, Whitaker@gmail. Come subject, Mom, what's going on? It was a long message. Longer than most he'd ever sent me, which was ironic considering how rarely he used words with me these days. He opened with concern. Said the email I'd sent didn't sound like me. He asked if I was okay if something had happened. He told me I must have misunderstood what he said at the wedding, that it was a joke, just something light to make Harper's dad laugh. You know how weddings are, he wrote. Everyone's trying to be funny. I didn't reply. That afternoon, a second email arrived. This one was shorter, colder. He said I was being emotional, that I was throwing everything away over one misunderstanding. He referenced Harper's mother, who apparently agreed that I was always a little sensitive. He wrote, maybe you're going through something. Harper thinks this could be hormonal or stress-related. Then came the line I knew was coming. Selling the house is insane, Mom. That's my inheritance you're talking about. He called twice that night. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, then deleted the voicemail without listening to it. I didn't need to hear the tone. I already knew it. By the second day, the messages shifted. Pick up the phone, he wrote. We need to talk about this before you do something you regret. This isn't just your house, Mom. Dad would roll over in his grave. That was the moment I stopped opening his emails altogether. He had started pulling out the old tools, guilt, entitlement, imagined morality, and using them like a child slamming fists against a locked door. And I was done standing on the other side holding it shut with trembling hands. I wasn't trembling anymore. That week, I made an appointment with Teresa Parker, a real estate agent recommended by my neighbor. She was around my age, wore flats and oversized cardigans, and carried a leather-bound planner that looked like it had survived a war. When she sat across from me at my kitchen table and asked why I was selling, I just said I'm ready to live somewhere else. She didn't press. She nodded once and flipped open her planner. We listed the house the next day. I cleaned it from top to bottom, something I hadn't done in one sweep since Logan was still in school. I boxed up old photo frames, donated bags of linens, cleared out the attic where I'd once stored his crib. I moved like a woman who had somewhere to be, and maybe for the first time I did. Within 48 hours, we had 4 offers. The highest was $115,000 over asking all cash, 30-day close. Teresa called me with the offer while I was standing in the backyard pulling weeds from the flower beds one last time. Do you want to sleep on it? She asked. No, I said. Let's move forward. 3 days later, Logan sent a final message. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit in my inbox untouched like a piece of spoiled fruit. When I finally did read it, the subject line said it all. Congratulations. You win. He called me selfish, cold, accused me of embarrassing him in front of Harper's family, said I'd ruined our relationship. There was no question of why I had done what I did. Just blame, just bitterness. I printed the message and slid it into a folder labeled in black ink for memory, not for court. Not as evidence of his cruelty, but as proof for myself that I hadn't imagined it, that I had been pushed, sidelined, laughed at, and when I finally stood up, he called me dramatic. I didn't feel anger as much as I felt confirmation. This was never about a house. It was about a hierarchy. One where I was always expected to remain at the bottom, smiling up. He had assumed the house would be his because he had never once considered that it belonged to someone with her own life, her own dreams. He thought of it like a family heirloom, a given. He thought of me the same way, a fixture, predictable, passive, not anymore. The day I signed the closing papers, I walked through each room one last time, not to say goodbye, but to release it. The room where I waited up for him the first time he missed curfew. The corner where I found him reading under a blanket with a flashlight when he was 9. The patch of wall in the hallway with a scratch where his bike once leaned. I touched none of it. I just breathed, deeply, slowly. Then I placed the keys in an envelope on the counter, locked the door behind me, and walked away. Not because I was done with a house, because I was finally done with the role he cast me in. He may have assumed that the house would be part of his future, but he forgot something important. I was the one who paid for it. I was the one who kept it standing, and I was the one who chose who stayed and who didn't. Savannah was warm in a way that wasn't just about temperature. It wrapped around me like something soft and familiar, like a cardigan I hadn't worn in years, but still fit perfectly. The humidity hung in the air, thick with salt and jasmine, and the streets seemed to hum with an old, slow rhythm. People walked instead of rushing, and even the breeze through the trees had a certain gentleness to it. The apartment I found was small, just 2 rooms, a worn galley kitchen, and a balcony that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't fancy. The walls were slightly uneven, and the faucet in the bathroom made a sound like a sigh every time I turned it on. But it was clean. Private, safe, and it was mine. It had been years since I'd lived anywhere that didn't carry echoes of someone else's needs. I moved in with only the essentials: a bed, a desk, 2 chairs, a teapot. Everything fit into a single moving truck which felt poetic in a way. 30 years of motherhood distilled into a few boxes and 1 suitcase. I set them down in the living room, looked around, and realized there was nothing left to unpack emotionally. I had brought only what I wanted to carry forward. The day after I arrived, I took a walk down to the river. It was only 4 blocks from the apartment, and I wandered slowly, letting the city introduce itself to me. Moss draped from the trees like lace, iron balconies curled overhead like old handwriting. And people, actual strangers, nodded and said good morning as I passed. No one asked what I did for a living. No one wondered why I was alone. No one looked past me like I wasn't there. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. Later that week, I found the bookstore. It was tucked between a bakery and a small cafe with outdoor tables shaded by navy blue umbrellas. The windows were dusty, and the sign out front read Thistle and Pages. Inside, the air smelled of paper and cedarwood, and the floor creaked charmingly with every step. Behind the counter stood a woman about my age wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a faded t-shirt that read, "Books cheaper than therapy." Her name was Rita. We started talking almost immediately. About books, about the weather, about the best coffee in the neighborhood. I didn't tell her much about myself, but she looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're not here on vacation." I shook my head. "Thought so," she said. "You've got that look? Starting over?" I smiled. "Something like that." 10 minutes later, she asked if I was looking for part-time work. "I'm not good with computers," I warned. "I'm not either," she replied, waving her hand. "I just need someone who loves books and knows how to talk to people who are sad." That was how I got the job. 15 hours a week shelving, organizing, keeping an eye on the shop when Rita went to pick up her grandkids or visit the farmer's market. The pay wasn't much, but it wasn't about the money. It was about motion. About waking up with a reason to brush my hair, to walk with purpose, to belong somewhere, without being needed in the way I used to be. Each day began gently. I'd rise with the sun, open the windows, and let the air in. I'd make coffee in a chipped blue mug I found at a thrift store, and take it out to the small iron bistro table on the balcony. I watched the neighborhood wake up. The woman with the corgi who always walked at 7:15. The boy with the cello case crossing the street toward the music school. The barista at the corner cafe who danced while she mopped. At Thistle and Pages, I learned the joy of simplicity. I recommended novels to people who hadn't read fiction in years. I reorganized the poetry section on slow afternoons. I helped a 12-year-old girl find her first Nancy Drew, and a retired professor locate an out-of-print memoir he hadn't seen since 1973. Some days were quiet. I sat behind the counter sipping tea and reading. Other days, the shop was busy with tourists or college students, and I found myself laughing at things I hadn't realized were funny. I didn't check my phone for Logan's name. I didn't Google him or scroll through Harper's social media to see if she had posted wedding pictures. It wasn't that I didn't think about him. I did, often, but not in the same way. I thought about the way his curls used to bounce when he ran, the way he clutched his favorite blanket in his tiny fists when he was tired, the way he whispered, "Don't forget me," when I dropped him off at his first day of kindergarten. And then I thought about the man who joked about my place at the wedding, the one who laughed without looking back. They were both real, both true. But I no longer needed to choose which version to hold on to. I could let them both go. On Sunday mornings, I took long walks by the river. I wore wide-brimmed hats and carried a canvas tote bag filled with library books and fresh fruit. Sometimes I sat on a bench for an hour doing nothing but watching the water move. One day I passed a couple about Logan's age pushing a stroller. The man bent over the baby, his hand soft and steady. I watched them for a moment, wondering what kind of father he would become. If he would remember his mother someday. If he'd change. And then I let the thought pass like a breeze. That evening I sat on my small balcony with a blanket over my knees and a paperback open in my lap. The sky was peach and lavender, and the sounds of the city melted into a gentle hush. I had a home. Not a legacy, not a plan for someone else's future, but a space that asked nothing of me but presence. And in that space, I began to feel whole again. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when Rita handed me a note. She'd been restocking the new arrivals shelf when the bell above the door rang, followed by a pause that lasted just long enough to make her look up. The man at the counter didn't buy anything. He didn't even browse. He just asked if I worked here and left his name. She brought me the message on a folded scrap of receipt paper. Her expression was kind but curious. Said he was your son. Sounded desperate. I tucked the note into my apron pocket and went back to dusting the shelves. 2 days later, he came back. I saw him through the bookstore window before he even stepped inside. Thinner than I remembered, tired around the eyes, the same expensive shoes now scuffed at the toes. His hands were shoved in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, like a boy who had been sent to the principal's office. He didn't come into the store. He waited outside, staring at the bricks beneath his feet. I stepped out quietly and closed the door behind me. When he looked up, his voice cracked. "Please," he said, "can we talk?" There was a cafe next door with 2 outdoor tables. We sat at the one near the hydrangeas. He ordered black coffee and barely touched it. For a while, we just sat in silence. I let him speak first. "I miss you," he began, voice low and tentative. "I miss having a mother who believed in me." I didn't interrupt. I let the words settle. "I was wrong," he said. "I didn't know how wrong until everything got quiet." He paused again, looked up, then back down. I could see it wasn't easy for him. Not the apology, not the humility. "I don't want to lose you," he said. And that was when I finally spoke. "You didn't lose me, Logan. You stopped seeing me." He opened his mouth but said nothing. I took a breath. Steady, calm. "I believed in you. Every version of you. But belief without boundaries isn't love. It's enablement. And I can't go back to that." "I want to do better," he whispered. "I hope you do," I said. "For yourself. And for the family you're building." He looked up, then eyes wet. "I'm not here to punish you," I continued. "And I don't hate you. But I've built something here. A quiet, good something. And I can't tear it down just because you're ready to notice me again." He nodded slowly. The kind of nod people give when they know there's nothing left to argue. We sat a moment longer, the air between us heavy with the kind of love that has turned into something quieter. Respect, maybe. Or mourning. "I'll go," he said. I stood with him. He hesitated, then leaned in as if to hug me. I didn't step away. But I didn't reach for him either. We held that space. Then he left. No promises, no parting lines, just the soft sound of his shoes against pavement as he walked away. I returned to the bookstore and Rita didn't ask what happened. She just handed me a cup of peppermint tea and said, "You're still standing." That evening I walked home slowly. The sun was starting to dip below the rooftops, casting long golden streaks across the sidewalk. At home I took my time with dinner. I sautéed garlic and olive oil, chopped fresh tomatoes, boiled a small pot of pasta. I opened a bottle of wine and poured just enough into a glass to feel celebratory, not indulgent. I set the table for one. A simple white plate, a cloth napkin, a candle, a small vase with a single sunflower from the market. And I sat down, not in a rush, not out of habit, but by choice. For so many years I had prepared meals while standing at the counter, eating with one hand while juggling school forms, late-night phone calls, and never-ending to-do lists. I had fed others, supported others, waited for permission to rest. But tonight there was no one to serve, only myself. I twirled the pasta slowly, savoring each bite. I sipped the wine. I read a few pages of a book I'd been saving. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel like I was dining in the shadows of someone else's life. I had set the table. I had chosen the seat. And I had filled the plate with something made with care, something I wanted. Not what was left, not what remained after everyone else had taken their fill, but what I had created for myself on purpose. The candle flickered gently. The room was quiet, but not empty. Outside, the wind rustled through the crepe myrtles, and inside, a woman who had spent decades living in quiet sacrifice finally tasted peace. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the quiet ways we lose ourselves bit by bit in service of the people we love, then you're not alone. Have you ever given so much that there was nothing left for you? Have you ever sat at a table and realized you were only ever there to serve? Maybe it's time to ask, what would it look like if you chose yourself? If you've ever walked away not out of anger but out of clarity, share your story in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because sometimes the softest stories hold the strongest truths, and sometimes setting your own place at the table is the boldest thing you'll ever do.